Corners of Your World, 60 minutes, one planet, countless stories, as we bring you the very latest of what's going on across the continent and beyond. We'd like to hear from you what's happening in your world, as we don't only tell you what's happening, we'd like you to tell us what's happening wherever you are. This is the show that brings you the news, the voices and the perspectives that matter. You tell us where you are listening from, particularly SABC Plus app is where you can find us. You also live stream on YouTube. That's where you'll find us. If you go to the DSTV audio bouquet, we are on channel 802, on OpenView channel 628. And if you want to reach out to us, let us know what you think about some of what we bring in to you. Just send us a voice note on 063 406 9126. And we also welcome your emails, info@channelafrica.org. Let's go straight to our top stories this hour. We start with this. Catholic cardinals who will choose the next pope were locked behind the heavy wooden doors of the Sicilian chapel today, sequestrated from the world to elect the man that they hope can unite a diverse but divided global church. Trent Murray has more from Rome.
It's a mammoth task as the Roman Catholic cardinals have started to converge to elect a new pope. They kicked off the proceedings with a public mass in St. Peter's Basilica, led by Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re.
Siamo qui per invocare l'aiuto dello Spirito Santo.
We are here to invoke the help of the Holy Spirit, to implore His light and strength, so that the Pope elected may be he whom the Church and humanity need at this difficult and complex turning point in history.
Complesso e tormentato.
Parish priest Hans Magdurulan says that he hopes the next pope will embody the life of Christ.
There is no other trait and other description and quality of the next pope other than the life of Christ. May he truly radiate the life of Christ, the mercy, the compassion, the justice of Christ, of course, no?
Sudan's army says its anti-aircraft systems intercepted drones targeting a naval base in the wartime capital of Port Sudan. On Wednesday, explosions were heard in the city, though it was not immediately clear whether or not they were near the Flamingo base.
Standing in front of a towering column of smoke in Port Sudan, Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has vowed retribution. Drone strikes have pounded Sudan's wartime capital for days, opening a new front in the conflict between Burhan's armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Port Sudan had enjoyed relative calm since the civil war erupted more than 2 years ago. It has become a hub for diplomats, UN officials and agencies, and is Sudan's key gateway for humanitarian aid. It's also a base for the army-aligned government after the RSF seized much of the capital Khartoum early in the conflict, as well as a refuge for hundreds of thousands of displaced people.
And in Kenya, court fined 4 men of trying to traffic thousands of ants valuable to the country's ecosystem. In cases experts say signals a shift in the biopiracy from trophies like elephant ivory to lesser-known species.
2 Belgian teenagers, a Vietnamese man and a Kenyan national, were arrested on April 5th, accused of trying to smuggle roughly 5,440 giant African harvester ant queens in modified test tubes and syringes. Kenyan prosecutors valued the ants at around 1.2 million Kenyan shillings, or $9,300. Retail prices in the UK, however, suggest the haul could have fetched as much as $1
asset reallocation.
I do apologize for that. The US dollar edged higher against the yen and the euro on Wednesday as traders awaited the outcome of the Federal Reserve's policy meeting later in the session, and uncertainty over upcoming trade negotiations still weighed on sentiment. Jane Foley, head of FX strategy at Rabobank, has this to say.
Asset reallocation out of US assets, and we certainly saw some of the Asian markets picking up steam. There is amongst many investors this perception that, in contrast perhaps to last year, the year before, the US growth outlook, the US stock market is certainly not the only game in town, and people are again looking at the sort of rebirth of the growth story potentially for Germany, but also maybe for Japan and other parts of Asia as being really quite interesting against the context of recessionary fears in the US. But there's another story here too. For months, we've been talking about the possibility of a Mar-a-Lago Accord in which the US authorities might push for a weaker dollar in some of the terms, perhaps, for some of these trade negotiations that they're having. And I think that was one of the factors that really had an impact in the movements that we saw in some of these Asian currencies this week.
At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Sepiso Magwetu.
Channel Africa.
Get the African perspective right here on Channel Africa, and please share that perspective, your perspective, wherever you are on the continent, in the diaspora. Reach out to us on social media. We are on X, we are on TikTok, we are on Instagram. Find us on at Channel Africa 1. That's the numerical figure 1. And on Facebook, it's just simply Channel Africa. So let's go straight to one of our top stories. That is about 133 cardinals under the age of 80 are meeting at the Sistine Chapel to elect a new pope for the 1.4 billion strong Roman Catholic Church. Once the conclave has elected a pope, the new pontiff will appear on the central balcony at St. Peter's Basilica. Visitors and the faithful have flocked to the Vatican City for the crucial first day of the conclave. Bonolo Maribe has more.
It's a mammoth task as the Roman Catholic cardinals have started to converge to elect a new pope. They kicked off the proceedings with a public mass in St. Peter's Basilica, led by Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re.
Siamo qui per invocare l'aiuto dello Spirito Santo.
We are here to invoke the help of the Holy Spirit, to implore His light and strength, so that the Pope elected may be he whom the Church and humanity need at this difficult and complex turning point in history.
Complesso e tormentato.
Parish priest Hans Magdurulang says that he hopes the next pope will embody the life of Christ.
There is no other trait and other description and quality of the next pope other than the life of Christ. May he truly radiate the life of Christ, the mercy, the compassion, the justice of Christ, of course. No? That is the love, the mercy, and the justice of Christ for the whole world. Justice is not just about for the victims of war and crimes, but justice for the poor, justice for the environment, justice for the little people.
No pope has been elected on the first day of a conclave for centuries. Voting could continue for several days before they know who will be the 267th pontiff, as people across the world wait in anticipation.
It's really amazing. We're very fortunate to be in Rome at this time. So, looking forward to it.
I have great hope because I think that Pope Francis gave us an incredible legacy to follow, and I know that the Holy Spirit will be guiding the cardinals as they choose the next pope.
From Thursday, the cardinals can vote as many as 4 times a day. Black smoke from a chimney on the roof of the chapel will mark an inconclusive vote, while white smoke will signal that a new pope has been elected. Bonolo Maribe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And now let's find out the latest on what's happening in Haiti. This is Doctors Without Borders warns that its Tabaret Trauma Hospital in Haiti's capital of Port-au-Prince is undergoing an extremely high level of violence as armed groups are coordinating attacks on several areas of the city that were previously beyond their control. For more on this, we're joined on the line by Claire Waterhouse, Regional Advocacy Coordinator and Head of Operational Support Unit at Doctors Without Borders Southern Africa. Very good evening to you, Claire. Thank you so much for speaking to us. So when we talk about extremely high levels of violence in itself is quite frightening. Just how bad is it?
Hi, thanks so much for having me to talk about this. It's
it's getting really serious. We've seen a big uptick in violence since February. As you know, Haiti is experiencing a rather unprecedented situation of gang violence, which now the gangs have united in a sort of single coalition and are trying to consolidate control in Port-au-Prince, which is where we operate a trauma center. We previously operated 3 trauma centers there, in fact, in 3 hospitals, and we've had to stop in 2 of them. And there are now only 2 hospitals left in the whole of Port-au-Prince capable of providing trauma care, and one of those is our hospital. The teams are exhausted. We are operating just barely at functioning at this stage. It's just really intense and really concerning, because we are extremely worried that we will have to stop operations as well, and then how will Haitians access care, especially emergency care, as a result of the violence all around them.
And just in comparison, the area of Port-au-Prince, how many such facilities of yours exist there, or are you the only one, and is that why you're afraid of being forced to shut down?
Well, that is, pretty much it. So at the moment, there were, in the last month, let's say, 2 of the 4 trauma centers have been forced to suspend activities in Port-au-Prince. So there's one last facility that is not ours, and then there's our facility at the hospital, Tabare. And both of those facilities are operating massively overstretched, completely overwhelmed by the need. You know, the facility that we're in, it has 50 beds in, so usually we should have 50 or less patients in there. And at the moment, we have consistently more than 70. We cannot operate with more than 75 patients in there, but the needs are completely overwhelming, and there's far more needs than what we can deal with. We've had to turn meeting rooms in the hospital into hospital wards. That's how bad it is, basically. And a lot of the injuries we're seeing are really severe. 40% of the injuries that we're seeing are women and children, which tells us that this is not a situation that is respecting any kind of protection for civilians or protection for healthcare facilities. You know, we're getting stray bullets in our facilities quite regularly. Our staff are struggling to get there because they are stuck at home due to the violence. It's an extremely precarious situation.
And the type of cases that you're faced with, particularly you said 40% of that are women and children, and just generally people who are even able to make it to your trauma centers, what kind of complications are they presenting?
So a vast majority of them are coming into the trauma center with injuries directly linked to the violence. So there would be any kinds of wounds or injuries or trauma that has come from that. We're seeing obviously a lot of psychological trauma as well from what people are experiencing. And then, of course, there are the normal things that people need help with, particularly of concern to us, are women and children, especially. So maternal health is a big concern for us, and then the injuries that we're seeing, many of which are very severe. We're not talking about, minor scrapes and bruises. We're talking about serious bullet injuries or worse. So it is extremely serious, and it means that it takes a lot of capacity to be able to treat these patients, which of course we do. We treat anyone who comes in. We don't ask questions. Anyone is allowed to access free quality healthcare with us. But there is a limit to what is possible when healthcare facilities and healthcare workers are not being respected. And that's what we're calling for at the moment in Haiti. We are sounding the alarm that we are very perilously close to having to stop our operations in Port-au-Prince, and we are extremely worried that if we do that, Haitians will not be able to access care. So we need guarantees of our safety.
And I'd imagine that if there is an increase in violence, that would mean much needed resources are not reaching you, whether it is human resources or the materials you need to carry out your trauma services.
Yeah, absolutely. In any situation like this, and we see it across the world wherever we operate, and sadly there are many places at the moment where these situations are very severe. But in any of these situations, It's very difficult to get supplies in. And as I mentioned, our staff as well, they're struggling to get to the hospital. Those that are there are, struggling to leave the hospital, are working incredible hours, are completely exhausted. So it becomes extremely tricky for us to be able to provide healthcare of a quality also that we know is sufficient and that will work, so we need supplies for that. We need all of those things in it, and it becomes increasingly difficult to get that in this situation because nowhere is safe at the moment.
And beyond Port-au-Prince, where else in the neighborhood nearby do you have facilities, or in which town, which are critical given the conflict situation?
So are less badly affected at the moment, and we've been in Port-au-Prince and Haiti as a whole for more than 30 years. We have facilities and activities all across Haiti, but the major center of our support has always been in Port-au-Prince, and that is now where we are seeing these massive issues in being able to provide care. As I've said, it's really up in the air at the moment as to whether we will be able to continue to provide that care for much longer because of the situation in Port-au-Prince, where it is the most severe.
And you are asking for respect for civilian life and obviously emergency aid service. Do you have any protection, particularly in the face of the deployment there of military services that are supposed to help in this regard?
So at the moment, it is it's difficult to rely on any protection at the moment because there is just such high levels of violence that make it difficult for us to know or understand what to expect at any given moment, and that is an extreme challenge for us because it means that we need to be able to predict the safety of our staff. And of course, we're working with all the different actors there to try to ensure the safety of our staff, ensure safe access for our staff. And of course, within our facilities, we do the best we can to ensure that it's a safe environment as well. So, for example, we do not allow any form of weapons, whether it's from armed forces who are trying to protect people, or whether it's from the armed groups who are responsible for a lot of the violence. We do not allow any of those things into our facilities. But of course, that then, isn't always easy to enforce, and it is also a constant battle for us in such a heavily armed, strife-ridden place.
Well, thank you so much for your time and wishing you all the best. Claire Waterhouse's Regional Advocacy Coordinator and Head of Operational Support Unit at Doctors Without Borders, Southern Africa, speaking to us from Port-au-Prince, where they are sounding the alarm of their inability to protect civilians under fire, where they say that the violence is escalating. It's in Tabare Trauma Hospital in Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince. Brings the time to 18 minutes past 10.
Annie Kalonji sur Channel Africa. Nous étions en train de savourer la chanson Démocratie.
Démocratie.
Ça veut dire quoi?
Démocratie, déjà, ça dérive de démocratie,
bon?
Qui est le régime dans lequel nous sommes, dans notre pays. Mais je plutôt pensé que nous sommes plutôt dans une démocratie.
Pourquoi?
Où il y a une cruauté tellement... une méchanceté des dirigeants envers la population. En fait, dans cette chanson, je suis en train de blâmer tout le monde. Je blâme et les dirigeants, qui pour moi sont des démocrates.
Oh, je suis maintenant en train de comprendre. Donc, démocratie. Oh Annie Kalonji, tous les dimanches sur Mix Vibration. Parlez-vous couramment le français? Êtes-vous passionné par la radio? Et êtes-vous qualifié pour travailler en Afrique du Sud? Envoyez-nous votre CV et votre 3 minutes démo en MP3 à @channelafrica.co.za pour avoir une chance de rejoindre la famille Channel Africa. Si vous n'avez pas de réponse après 14 jours, cela signifie que vous n'avez pas été retenu. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
My name is Neto, NETO Chamani. Osiyatiko, Nengezimo, Mkhanju, Phandle kunjani moyani. Voko Tantele. Africa at Play, Asteleli Siashaya. Africa's velvet voice is in the house. Africa at Play is a place to be, where we speak all things sport and music, from the African continent to the rest of the world. We speak to your bundles of joy in sport, 12-year-olds and below, teenagers in sport. And we speak to elite athletes, administrators, coaches, and all the behind-the-scenes stakeholders of sport and music. Africa at Play, Asteleli Siashaya. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
We continue with coverage of some of the big stories of the day here on the continent and throughout the world. We speak now about South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa launching phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela. It's a bold new chapter, he says, in South Africa's economic drive. The event was held at the Union Buildings at the country's capital of Pretoria. Ramaphosa outlined what he sweeping plans to accelerate growth, improve service delivery and tackle spatial inequality, saying that these structural reforms are essential to creating jobs, fix infrastructure and unlock the country's full potential. The president also made mention of the milestones that have been achieved in phase 1. To get more on the background of the project, including insights into what it's been able to achieve, Channel Africa's reporter Michael Mbewe joins us now. He attended the launch. Michael, very good evening to you. So let's talk about Operation Vulindlela. So if you look at the website of the presidency, it even has a dashboard. What was the idea behind it and what has it been able to achieve in phase 1?
Well, good evening, Tapisha, and good evening as well to our listeners across the continent of Africa. Yes, Operation Vulindlela is a joint initiative of the Presidency and National Treasury to accelerate the implementation of structural reforms and support economic recovery. It aims to modernize and transform network industries, including electricity, water, transport, and digital communication. So that's, the whole, how we can unpack just to highlight on what Operation Vulindlela aims to do. So the achievements for Operation Vulindlela in phase 1, just to highlight on your question, it's the electricity sector reform, where we have seen significant reduction in load shedding, expansion of private investment in renewable energy, restructuring of ESCOM, and electricity market reforms initiated. And then also we've seen logistics and transport reforms to port and rail system via the Freight Logistics roadmap. We've seen the president visiting places like the Transnet hubs in Durban and so on. And then also some transformation in telecommunications, where spectrum auction completed resulted in increased investment, better networks, and lower data cost. And then also water licensing, skilled visa reform as well, which is something that has to do with a new framework implemented to attract investment in the high-skilled immigration technician.
And without being negative or pessimistic about the intention of phase 2, I mean, just looking at digital communications, one of the successes has been able to migrate from analog to digital, but this has been a deadline that has been missed several times over. So in launching phase 2, is there a commitment at least to accelerate some of the envisaged deadlines given the lessons learned from phase 1?
Indeed, to be so, rightly put. Let me just highlight some of the reforms that we are about to witness in the second phase, where these areas are about to be focused on urban land and housing reform, where they will be addressing spatial inequality, and the local government reform, which is one of the elephants in the room, where they will improve basic service delivery, especially water and electricity. They also establish professional municipalities with proper skills and oversight, strengthen local administration by ensuring qualified municipal appointment, and also review local government fiscal framework to align revenue with responsibilities. And then also ongoing reforms in the energy sector, like I said, logistics, water management, immigration, tourism. But the commitment, as I said, the president has emphasized the need for bold, fast-paced reforms to unlock growth and jobs. He wants that without reform, poverty and unemployment will rise. Commits the government of national unity to stay the course and ensure that economic growth is rapid, inclusive, and benefits all South Africans. He also ends with a call to action to transform the economy and ensure future generations experience prosperity. So some of the key attributes that contributed to the successes of the phase one of Operation Vulindlela, as outlined by the President, includes strong government leadership and coordination, focus on targeted reforms, private sector participation, enabling policy and legislative changes, outcome-oriented and implementation, social partner and stakeholder collaborations, just in a nutshell. But what took center stage, speaking to Busisiwe Mavuso, she actually lauded the president on the issue of reforming the visa regime, which has been seen as a hindrance to economic growth because of it deters investor confidence in terms of how they access the documents to pave a way of them to be able to enable them to establish businesses in our land at the Piso.
The energy space was something that you spoke about. So there are those that have been ticked off, some of the plans, but there are those that have been marked as in progress. And in progress, which is something that I think phase one had highlighted, the energy availability factor. There's a report that recently highlighted that Eskom has missed its own goals in terms of the energy availability factor. That was something that was put at 70% this year. And we're going into winter here in South Africa, and Eskom is still saying, have no fear, there will be no load shedding in winter. This is something that, as much as I think Eskom and the Energy Ministry would like to really commit on, I don't think it's something that it can, because there was an expectation that there would be no load shedding coming into this year, and the load shedding occurred during summer. So if we're going to winter, that should complicate matters even more. Is the presidency, is government at least being realistic about what is within its achievement levels?
Indeed, Bishop. Before everything started this afternoon at the UN buildings, I engaged with the Minister of Electricity, because energy has been as a key to economic growth in Africa, the whole continent, where emphasis, many commentators, economic commentators, have lamented the fact that economic growth cannot prosper in Africa as far as we are lacking behind with energy. But now, engaging with the Minister of Electricity, Honorable Josenzo Ramakgopa, yes, he really emphasized, reaffirmed, and reassured that that's the plan, that the next 4 months or 5 months of winter, they will have enough, the country will have enough electricity supply and generation as well. And they are very optimistic that the challenge of electricity slowly but surely is coming to an end, because now they are also rolling in, different phases of allowing in, private entities for renewables to also, come in. So meaning that all those red tapes that we've been experiencing before are being loosened, so that, private partnership with government will be able to resolve, the challenges, economic challenges that the country as a whole is facing at the Piso.
Another interesting thing is about establishing competitiveness and efficiency of ports. Obviously, if we're speaking about economic growth, this has been a major stickler point, especially what we've seen with disaster relief management, its failures, but also the damage that we've seen, say, in KwaZulu-Natal. Urban planning, city management, and also just the regulatory environment within the sector. We've got new transport ministers who have bold plans on also how to fix this, but there's the public-private partnership aspect. Was there any conversations about how they're going to fix the bottlenecks?
indeed, the president really emphasized the fact that service delivery should be at the center of every municipality, so that our people can leverage on the freedom that the country earned for. So a conversation about reforming the transport sector, like you said, you see the accidents that are happening in some of our highways because of without rail, something that they also emphasize that rail transportation needs to be resuscitated to make sure that goods and services that we require as a country, but also imports and exports, are not overloading the our highways because of lots of trucks that are pinned in these highways. So really, the president was very optimistic, saying that the first phase was a collective effort that has yielded results, and is looking forward to continue where they have left from the phase one. But also another thing is that they want to focus on water issues because we've seen problems that we are now having. So national government wants to tap into water resources, where it will say that they will establish the National Water Resources Infrastructure Agency as a dedicated entity to own, manage, and invest in water resources. So through the Water Partnership Office, it will support public-private partnerships in water infrastructure to reduce issues of leaks, access to new water sources, and improve water treatment. So to address the root causes of service delivery failures, they will amend the Water Services Act to separate the role of municipalities as water services authorities and water service providers to be so.
Michael, thank you very much. Michael Mbeo, Channel Africa's reporter on that launch of Phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela, launched by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa earlier on in the capital, Pretoria.
Bonjour à tous. Nous aimerions entendre votre voix sur notre station de radio. Faites-nous plaisir et envoyez un petit mot ou un message de salutation à vos proches ou à vos présentateurs préférés de Channel Africa. Que vous soyez en Afrique, dans la diaspora ou n'importe où ailleurs dans le monde, nous voulons vous entendre. Envoyez vos messages de dédicace par email à info@channelafrica.co.za ou postez sur notre page Facebook, Twitter et Instagram avec le hashtag dédicace. Vous pouvez aussi nous faire une note vocale sur notre WhatsApp +27 66 408 87 42.
Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And we continue with that news. This time we are talking about the 9th International Academy of Astronautics Planetary Defense Conference underway in the South African town of Stellenbosch. The week-long conference brings together scientists, engineers, policymakers and industry leaders from around the globe. They're going to discuss the protection of the planet and hazardous near-Earth objects like asteroids and comets. For more on this, we're joined on the line by Dr. C.S. Mostert, Director at SCS Space and Acting African Regional Secretary of the IAA and Organizing Committee for the conference. A very good evening to you and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Yes, good evening. Glad to be speaking to you.
So this is the 9th iteration of the conference. How has it grown and what does it mean for South Africa to host it?
So the first white paper that was written about the potential threat of asteroids was published in 1990. Then it took a good 14 years to get to the point of having a first conference in 2004, because it's a global consensus that is needed to actually identify the threat and to act against the threat of a potential asteroid hitting Earth. And then for South Africa, it means that we have an opportunity to combine the forces between people, communities who don't normally talk to each other. On the one side, the astronomy community, on the other side, the space science, space technology people, and then also add disaster management. So it's a very unique opportunity for South Africa. And if you add to that the space industry in South Africa, then you have a unique mix of people in the room that can solve a new class of problem together.
So when we talk about the threats, if we could just start at a very basic level, what potential threats does Earth face in this realm?
So for those people who study the formation of the solar system, they argue that 4 billion years ago, there was a cluster of gas that started attracting each other to the point where the sun formed, and in that process of gas and things circulating around the sun, the planets formed, Earth and Mars and Jupiter. And after all these things formed, all the planets were formed, there's still pieces of rock flying around, and these pieces got together more or less in two rings. One ring is between Mars and Jupiter, and the other ring is on the other side of Neptune, very, very far away. Now, what happens is with this ring of asteroids between Mars and Jupiter is because Jupiter is a very big planet. Every now and again, it pushes one of these through its gravitational forces, one of these pieces of rock or collections of rock, actually out of its orbit and in the direction of Earth, and then they become near-Earth objects. And then this is the key study, because these near-Earth objects can actually become a threat to Earth. So the whole community of astronomers, they need to identify that, they need to characterize it to be able to say what kind of threat it is, because the bigger it is, of course, the bigger the impact, and the smaller it is, maybe it just burns up in the atmosphere and maybe reach Earth as a meteorite. So that's the kind of threat is of these asteroids.
More incidents of either unidentified objects or, as you say, asteroids or comets falling onto Earth, to a planet like Earth that has life form, because obviously those who are not in the scientific world are dealing in conjecture about whether there are other planets that have life form.
Yeah, so there's a number of observatories around the world that tracks these asteroids that come from the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter and become near-Earth objects. And if you look at what they are reporting, is that they can see significant number of these objects every night in the night sky. Now, whether I think maybe we're just able to measure better, maybe there are not more of them, but we are able to detect more of them. But there's a significant number of these objects.
How much of that has to do with the advances that we're seeing in, planetary technology, or even the reports of more and more astronauts leaving Earth, going to explore the other planets? How much of that is garnering more knowledge of what the dangers are?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So once you've identified this object and you try to characterize it, of course, then you can do something about it. So then the space agencies of the world get involved. And you can either send a satellite to do a flyby and take a picture of the potential threat, or you can actually launch a satellite to actually fly to the asteroid and then actually orbit in its vicinity, so it can be monitored. And then, of course, you can go all the way to the point where you actually launch a probe to go and measure the asteroid to see what it is. The Japanese with the Hayabusa mission has done that. And then what happened in the most recent past, the third way to deal with this, you can fly by, you can go and inspect it. The third way is, in fact, if it's considered to be a threat, then you can deflect it. So that's the third way that you can apply technology. And in fact, this was demonstrated on recently in the DART mission, where a rocket was launched, the satellite was launched, and it deflected not only the asteroid, it actually deflected a moon of the asteroid. And there was even some South African technology on this particular satellite.
So in this gathering, what kind of conversations, groundbreaking conversations, are being expected, particularly in innovation around planetary defense?
So of course the biggest question is after the threat has been, well, to identify the threat, the biggest question is what is the probability of it hitting Earth? And this is where there's a lot of uncertainty because these are very faint objects. So even if it's got a 1% probability of hitting the Earth, then a whole ecosystem kicks in to characterize what is the real probability. And of course, the more you can observe an object like this, the more you can actually see it. But then the next question arises, once it's considered to be a threat, is what is the best mitigation strategy? And in that case, the actual rockets that are deployed, the actual satellites that are deployed, all cost money. So the big question is, how do we actually achieve an inspection, a flyby, or a orbit around the asteroid, or even a deflection with the least amount of money? And these asteroids, they come in their own orbits, so it's quite tough to actually reach them. So that's the next question is what is the appropriate reaction? And then, of course, the third set of questions has to do with, so what if it hits the Earth? Then the disaster management community gets involved, and they have to ask very difficult questions as to, are we going to evacuate Cape Town of 4 million people because there's a potential asteroid coming to Cape Town? And you can just imagine the kind of impact and the scale of that kind of problems that needs to be solved.
And my question then would be, are there parts of Earth that would be more vulnerable to these near-Earth objects impacting the Earth? As in, look, my understanding of this area is very limited, but as the Earth spins, does climate change have anything to do with that, where these objects might land?
No, so climate change does not have an impact, but what does have an impact is whether it falls in the sea or it hits the land. So if it can, the whole deflection question is, can the asteroid be deflected to fall into the sea as opposed to hitting New York City or Cape Town City? So that is a big issue, and that is the heart of the mitigation strategy.
Okay, so what would be employed? Has there been any research on what would be possible?
Yes. So the big demonstration that was held with the DART mission was to demonstrate that the asteroid, in fact, the moon of the asteroid, can be moved. So it was, I think, moved with 21 minutes. So you can imagine that if it was on its way to the center of Africa and you delay it by 21 minutes, you may just land up in the Indian Ocean. And that's a big benefit to the country that is being affected. So deflecting, or these asteroids also consist of many constructions. In some cases, it's just a bunch of rocks that actually stick together as a result of microgravity. So if you go and put a big explosion between them, they actually will just disperse and not have any significant impact as a collective.
And the contribution that the SKA can make, I know it's our pride and joy as South Africa, and the type of expertise it's been able to attract. How does it land in this conversation?
So the SKA looks very far into space. It looks very, very long ago into space. So the SKA itself is not the right instrument, but however there are optical telescopes which are equally important, which are hosted at Sutherland in South Africa, and those telescopes form part of an international network monitoring all these asteroids which have been identified, and even identify asteroids that are a potential threat, called near-Earth objects. So the South African team who is monitoring and manning the telescope is contributing on a daily basis to the monitoring process.
Very, very interesting conversation, and we really thank you for sharing those interesting insights with us. Much appreciated, Professor. And that there is Dr. Sias Mostert, Director at SCS Space and Acting African Regional Secretary of the IAA and Organizing Committee for the conference.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
It's 14 minutes to 10, so we go to the United Nations now, where we tell you about this United Nations Secretary General expressing his concern about Indian military operations against Pakistan, reiterating his call for maximum restraints from both countries. Antonio Guterres was reacting to the news that India has launched strikes on various sites in Pakistan overnight in the aftermath of an attack on Hindu tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir on April the 22nd. India has blamed Pakistan for 26 people dying, saying that Pakistan backed the militants responsible for the attack. An accusation Pakistan has, of course, rejected. Show and Bright Peace reports that Pakistan's military claims that Indian strikes have killed at least 31 people, including 26 civilians.
Two nuclear-armed states on the cusp of a full-blown conflict after India fired missiles into multiple locations in Pakistan-controlled territory, including its most populous province of Punjab, in what India's defence ministry termed precision strikes targeting terrorist camps. As Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi chaired an emergency cabinet meeting in New Delhi, Vikram Misri is India's Foreign Secretary.
India exercised its right to respond and preempt, as well as deter more such cross-border attacks. These actions were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate, and responsible. They focused on dismantling the terrorist infrastructure and disabling terrorists likely to be sent across to India. It was deemed essential that the perpetrators and planners of the 22nd April attack be brought to justice. Despite a fortnight having passed since the attacks, there has been no demonstrable step from Pakistan to take action against the terrorist infrastructure on its territory or on territory under its control. Instead, all it has indulged in are denials and allegations.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif accused India of a blatant act of war and promised retaliation, as Islamabad claimed to have shot down a number of Indian aircraft during the attack. Listen to Pakistan's military spokesperson, Lieutenant General Ahmed Sharif.
Pakistan will take all these steps that are necessary to defend its territorial integrity, sovereignty and honor of the country and its people. And these steps are but Pakistan remains a very responsible state. You understand that after the Pahalgam incident also, Pakistan offered that instead of putting allegations without evidence, there is a need for undertaking a transparent, independent inquiry by neutral inquiry. And so that's the way forward that we suggested, because we didn't see any shred of evidence on these allegations.
The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed his concern about Indian military operations across the line of control between Indian and Pakistani-controlled parts of Jammu and Kashmir, which serves as a de facto border between the two nations. He warned that the world could not afford a military conflict between these two powerhouse states that have been involved in military standoffs over disputed Kashmir and cross-border terrorism periodically and as far back as 1947. And it remains one of the oldest disputes on the UN agenda. This was the UN chief on Monday.
It is also essential, especially at this critical hour, to avoid a military confrontation that could easily spin out of control. Now is the time for maximum restraint and stepping back from the brink. That has been my message in my ongoing outreach with both countries. Make no mistake, a military solution is no solution. And I offer my good offices to both governments in the service of peace. The United Nations stands ready to support any initiative that promotes de-escalation, diplomacy, and the renewed commitment to peace.
The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on X that he was monitoring the situation closely, echoing President Donald Trump, who expressed hope the escalation would end quickly.
It's a shame we just heard about it, just as we were walking in the doors of the Oval. Just heard about it. I guess people knew something was going to happen based on a little bit of the past. They've been fighting for a long time. You know, they've been fighting for many, many decades and centuries, actually, if you really think about it. No, I just hope it ends very quickly.
While neighboring state China also weighed in, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian.
We express regret regarding India's military action early this morning and are concerned about the current escalation in the situation. India and Pakistan are inseparable neighbors, and both are also neighbors of China. China opposes all forms of terrorism and calls on both India and Pakistan to prioritize regional peace and stability, remain calm and restrained, and avoid actions that could further complicate the situation. We are working with the international community to continue playing a constructive role in easing the current tensions.
In a world populated by wars and conflicts, Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, the DRC, to mention a few, wars that exacerbate humanitarian needs, stretching finite resources, while compounding the suffering of civilians, in particular women and children. I'm Shervin Bryce-Pease in New York.
Now, a study by Ghanaian researchers revealed that since the introduction of the 1994 free schooling program, the country has recorded substantial increases in enrollment rates at the basic education level. Ghana introduced the free compulsory universal basic education program in 1994. This meant that families could send their children to public schools without even having to pay school fees. In 2005, it introduced the capitation grant scheme to further reduce financial barriers to education and increase access. More on findings from Pearl Kay, senior lecturer at the University of Ghana.
What inspired this research was trying to understand how free education policies are working. So this research in Ghana, but definitely is applicable to other countries that are implementing free education policies. So it is well known in the academic literature that there's something that is called the quality-quantity trade-off. And I'm sure people know about it in other settings. So when you add more quantity, sometimes you may lose quality. So when we bring it to the education, but you don't increase the number of classrooms, schools, teachers, books, etc. to keep up with the numbers, then quality is likely to decline. And so one of the things that inspired this was because in Ghana we were expanding to free secondary education. And so we wanted to just get a sense of, okay, so how did the free education at the lower levels pan out in terms of learning outcomes? So that's really what started it all. Do we see that there has been some decline in the quality after the quantities increased? So that's how we started. And then we luckily there was already a survey conducted 10 years apart. in Ghana. So we were able to use that data because one was conducted maybe a few years after the implementation of the capitation grants, which was supposed to help schools to eliminate tuition, but enroll as many children as would want to attend. So that's how we went about it.
And what would you say were the key findings?
Yeah, so the key findings, which of course is concerning, is that if you look at the findings, so if you compare, the first survey was conducted in 2006 and the next one now 2016. And what we found is that within that decade, the likelihood of being able to read and the likelihood of being able to perform a written calculation actually declined for people with less than upper secondary. So the people who had primary education or lower secondary education were less likely to be able to read a very short sentence or to answer a written calculation over the 10-year period. And this is something that we are attributing, could be likely to the fact that the increase in the quantity of people that were going to school was not matched by the same increase in the input. And I mean, understandably, in our resource-constrained context, it's not so easy to say that maybe for every additional child that we enroll, we are going to increase the amount of input. So it's understandable, but it's really something we want to highlight that if we want to make sure that everybody goes to school, it is very important that we are ready to invest all the resources to make sure that everybody that goes actually gets out of education what it is that they are being sent to school for.
So would you say since the introduction of free basic education program, it's working?
No, so the answer is in two parts. It's working in the sense that yes, so now more children are going to school more than ever, but the concern is the decline in the literacy and the numeracy. Because ultimately, you don't want people to go to school just because they are going to school. You want them to go to school to develop skills that they can use to impact, the labor force, become productive citizens, and drive development. So if you have more people going to school, but in the long term, the literacy and the numeracy is declining, then it's a problem. And even in our study, we only looked at very basic literacy and numeracy. Can you read a sentence? Can you answer a written calculation? But in the real world, you actually need far more than that to succeed in the 21st century labor market. So that is what we want to highlight, that it's really not just about having more children going to school. And it's not just a Ghana problem or even a sub-Saharan African problem. There's globally what is called the global learning crisis. And that is the issue that people are grappling with. Okay, more people than ever are going to school, but we find that learning outcomes are actually declining. So we need to pay attention to that.
Does the research offer any recommendations then as to how then the government needs to go about addressing this decline in numeracy literacy?
Yes, so the recommendation is that the free education policies to truly succeed in terms of both increasing the number that are sent to school and keeping the level of the quality, we need to invest more in it. So if you understand that this year we are rolling out, a free education policy at this, we should be ready to commit more teachers, more classrooms, more books. I mean, I know it's a lot of money, but once you start, it should be something that we should really keep in mind. Okay, to keep up the quality, if I'm going to, increase the number of children by maybe, let's say, 1,000 this year, then I need to make sure that I also increase the budget accordingly. It's a tough decision, but it's really what needs to be done.
And that there is Nhlanhla Mahlangu speaking to Poa K, senior lecturer at the University of Ghana. Brings us to 2 minutes to 10. As we wrap up Africa World Hour, Nolo Matlaila is with us to tell us what's coming up on Hotlines this evening. So what do you have up your sleeves?
Exciting show, of course. We always like to celebrate a little bit of love, just to remind people that love is all around. So today we're focusing on self-love. In the first hour of the show, we're going to be speaking to a lady who, after, learning how to love herself in her later years, in her early 50s, she actually went and reignited her passion for pageantry. And at the age of 51, she won her first pageant title. And today she's doing all the things she's ever dreamt of doing as a young adult, right? So that just goes to remind us that you can still do the things you wanted to do. You can still follow your dreams despite the age, and we attest that to self-love. We will also be speaking to 2 young ladies who come from the rural areas of South Africa, who have started their own production and film company. Because most young children in that area, it's quite difficult for them to travel to cities, big cities like Johannesburg, to go to the schools to learn about film and production. So we'll be speaking to them, and we'll be finding out the kind of projects they are rolling out there. I believe that coming up next week, they are hosting Writing for Screen. Yes, so they want to diversify the different types of opportunities you find in the film industry, and teaching them that it's not just, everything is not in front of the camera. There's a lot of work behind the camera as well.
And I'm actually just thinking that storytelling from somebody who has largely grown up in rural areas is so different to what it's like in the urban area, where sometimes a lot of what we see here is very plastic, very superficial. And as I said, the storytelling must have a twist to it.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I heard a quote yesterday from a dear friend of mine who said, Nolo, I just discovered that the best stories are the authentic stories.
Absolutely.
The real ones, the ones that come with the experience.
All right. Thank you so much. Looking forward to Hotlines this evening. From us, it's Guide from Africa World Hour.
Hotlines bring you fresh perspectives about love